Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us for Friday SLO Talk. My name is Jarek, and I am the coordinator and the founder of the Friday SLO Talks. Today's speaker is an internationally recognized consultant, speaker writer, and workshop facilitator with over 40 years of experience in higher education and administration. She has taught graduate courses in assessment and educational research methods, as well as undergraduate courses in writing, statistics, developmental mathematics. Her common sense approach to higher education assessment focuses not only on assessment itself, but on its primary purpose, helping students assess their learning. I am also pleased to inform you that I am assisted by two coaches, at least right now. These are the SLO coordinators from California community colleges, Enrique and Amanda. They are going to help me moderate the chat. If you could just please wave. Say hello, Enrique.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning.
And Amanda.
Good morning.
Good morning. And with that, here's Linda Suskie. Thank you very much for joining us. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Jarek. Let me tell everybody a little bit about why I'm doing this really strange topic. My husband asked what I was doing, and he said, "What is that?" And I said, "You don't want to know. He doesn't work in higher education." Jarek and his colleagues put together a really impressive course last year on basically getting started with student learning outcomes assessment. And their basic framework was Bloom's taxonomy. And I contacted Jarek and I said, you know, that's not the only option out there, and I'm not really a fan of it. Maybe I could do a session to let people know that if they're not comfortable with Bloom's, there are other alternatives out there that get at the same end. And Jarek, being the nicest person in the world, said, sure. So here I am today. As you know, he's recording the session. I'm also going to send a PDF of these slides to Jarek if you just want, just a PDF of the slides. Also, if any of you want to either use your phone or a screen save to save a slide, that's fine. I just ask that you give credit to the source. I'm going to pause periodically for questions. And what I ask you to do is put your questions into chat, and Jarek and his fellow coaches will monitor that chat. And when I pause for questions, then they can bring them up. So for those of you who don't know what Bloom's is, let's go over exactly what it is. The official name is Bloom's Taxonomy of Educational Objectives. Benjamin Bloom created this in 1956, which means it's older than most of us, almost as old as me. And that's one of the challenges that I have with it. He took all possible learning that can happen anywhere from K-12 through higher education and said that there were three domains: the cognitive, which is what goes on in the brain, and that's what most of us try to work on when we're trying to help students learn. Affective is what a lot of us call attitudes and values. And then psychomotor is physical skills like lab skills, music skills, art skills. I think you could argue that speaking skills might be considered a psychomotor skill, but anything that involves movement of the body. Within the cognitive domain, he identified 6 areas, and I have them listed with the most basic at the bottom and what he thought was increasing levels of complexity. The most basic is knowledge, just straight memorized knowledge. The next level he called comprehension, which is just basic understanding. Beyond memorization, it's maybe explaining something in your own words. Then application is applying your learning to a new situation you haven't seen before. Analysis is where you take a fairly substantive body of knowledge or set of principles and you analyze how all the pieces fit together, how they all connect. Again, not memorizing or remembering or describing an existing structure, but creating a structure. Evaluation is making a judgment about something and defending it. And then synthesis is when you take everything you've learned and you use it to create something new that has never been created before. When we ask students to do a capstone project or a signature project, that's a real good example of synthesis. Now in 2000, and remember this is over 20 years ago, two other people took Benjamin Bloom's taxonomy and updated it. Not a huge amount of updating. What they did was take the nouns that he put in the cognitive domain and replace them with verbs. So knowledge became remember, comprehension became understand, application became apply, analysis became analyze. And then they felt that evaluation was evaluating, and then synthesis they called create. And this will make sense to me. Now, the top four, no matter which taxonomy you're looking at, a lot of people call higher order thinking skills. Knowledge, knowledge and understanding, that's the most basic kind of learning. But once you get into application, analysis, evaluation, synthesis, that's what a lot of people call higher order thinking skills. And in fact, some people call them HOTS for short. Now, a little bit of vocabulary as we talk about them, because Bloom talks about educational objectives. We talk about learning outcomes. There are a lot of terms that we use to describe what we want students to learn, and I've got them listed here. I tend to use all these terms synonymously. I like the phrase learning goals because over the years, a few people have misinterpreted learning outcomes to think that they're actually what students have learned, what a lot of us call assessment results. But learning outcomes is the most common term out there. And again, Bloom called them educational objectives. I use these synonymously. There are some colleges where they like to distinguish between a learning objective and a learning outcome. If your college does, that's fine with me, but I don't make a big deal out of it. So I may slip and call them learning outcomes or learning goals. I'm always talking about the same thing. Now, first question that I have is, do we really need a taxonomy of learning goals? And remember that a taxonomy is not a list of potential learning outcomes. It's a classification system. I do think that some of us and some of the people we work with need suggestions for what their learning outcomes should be, but I'm not really sure that everybody needs a taxonomy to organize those. Where a taxonomy like Bloom's has been helpful is it may make you start thinking about some broad category of learning outcome that you never considered before. For instance, you may never have thought of synthesis before as a learning outcome, and oh, that's a whole new kind of learning I never really thought about before. But it's, I mean, Benjamin Bloom's book listed an awful lot of very specific outcomes. He was thinking mostly about K-12. I'm not sure his book, the subsequent book, is really helpful. We have a lot of other resources in K-12. Here was where I think Bloom, why it became so pervasive in higher education. When the assessment movement was starting about 25 years ago, there weren't a whole lot of resources out there, and Bloom was well known as a taxonomy. And here's what it did. There were a lot of faculty, and there still are, that really basically just teach content. You know, their exams are multiple choice. It's all memorizing stuff, maybe doing some explaining of a concept, but nothing much beyond that. Bloom's is a way to get those folks to think about those higher order thinking skills that they may never have thought about. But since then, in the last 25 years, we've talked so much about things like critical thinking, information literacy, communication skills, analysis skills, problem solving skills, that I'm not really sure we need to talk about Bloom. So one of my lessons is going to be, if it really helps, great. But if you are struggling to use Bloom's, don't worry about it. Just talk about skills that get at that higher order thinking. So Jarek, and Enrique, let me pause there, see if any questions have come in or any comments, Rotten Tomatoes, anything.
Rotten Tomatoes. I like that.
There was just a question of, we were just saying, do we really need to use Bloom's taxonomy processing?
Do we need to use Bloom's taxonomy? No. There's no law that says you have to use Bloom's taxonomy. There's no accreditor that says you have to use it. I'm not aware of anybody. I mean, maybe there's some very minor accreditor organization that says you have to use it, but no. The key thing is you want to make sure you're thinking about at least some of those higher order thinking skills. You don't want to develop a curriculum in higher education that's only knowledge and understanding. You want to get students thinking about it in some way. Any other comments come in?
That's just the major theme right now.
Okay, then let me move on. And again, everybody, as anything occurs to you, put it into chat and Enrique will share it with me the next time I break for questions. So why don't I like Bloom's? I am, even though I said, you know, I have a feeling that when the assessment movement started a quarter century ago or more, Bloom's was, you know, maybe the most common resource. I'm still mystified by how Bloom's taxonomy has pervaded the higher ed assessment landscape. As you can see, it's a really old model. The update in 2000 was a really minimal update. There's been a lot of other work on other taxonomies since then that I think are more, well, I'll get into all the specifics about why I don't like Bloom's, but it's really interesting. I've met faculty who have no idea what a rubric is, no idea what a test blueprint is. Boy, they don't know what a curriculum map is, but it's burned into their brains that they have to follow Bloom's taxonomy when they're developing learning goals. It really frustrates me because I don't think it's the best framework out there for considering learning outcomes in higher education. Let me go into some details about why I'm not a fan of Bloom's. One is, if you remember, this is that hierarchy or that list of 6 kinds of thinking skills for the cognitive domain. A lot of people incorrectly interpret Bloom's cognitive hierarchy as prerequisites. I have had faculty tell me that if they're teaching a first-year course, they could only address knowledge and understanding because students have to master all the knowledge before they can begin thinking about it. Now, any elementary school teacher will tell you that that's baloney, but this is something that people read into Bloom's that isn't there. My next concern about Bloom's is it has those 3 broad domains of cognitive, affective, and psychomotor. And I think that performance skills, which we want students to develop, are really a combination of the cognitive and psychomotor domain. So I think Bloom creates a disparity when it really doesn't exist. I mentioned public speaking, for example, that you could argue that it's psychomotor, but it's not just psychomotor. You also have to, you know, plan and think about what you're going to say. So it's really a combination of cognitive and psychomotor skills. The same thing for visual and performing arts skills. It's not just knowing how to move your body, it's being able to choose the correct movement at the right time. Same thing with technology skills, manipulating machines and equipment and things like that. Putting together computer hardware, teamwork skills. Again, there's psychomotor aspects of it. There's also cognitive. So Bloom doesn't really accommodate these skills. And these are all really, really important in the 21st century. My next big concern with Bloom's is that it doesn't address what some educational experts have called habits of mind. Habits of mind are dispositions towards behaving intelligently when confronted with problems. That's a definition of habits of mind by Arthur Costa, who's one of the experts on thinking on habits of mind. Habits of mind are a composite of the cognitive and affective domain. Art Costa, along with B. Kallick, developed a list of 16 habits of mind. I'm not going to share all of them with you because I think some are more important in higher ed than others. These are some of the ones that I think are really important in higher ed. Students persisting, even though they run into trouble, they kind of power through. Striving for accuracy, that's things like proofreading your work, double checking your work. Managing impulsivity, like getting frustrated and say, I can't learn this, and storming off. Listening with understanding and empathy, that's part of teamwork skills. Thinking flexibly, that's part of problem solving, that if one route doesn't work, then how can you adjust things and tackle it from a different perspective? Taking responsible risks, deciding when to follow the rules blindly and when to question and say, maybe I should be bending this rule. Thinking about one's own thinking, how we learn, what's the best way for me to master something once I'm out of college and I have to learn things on my own. The big 2-bit phrase for that is metacognition, which is just one of my favorite words. Questioning and posing problems. Again, not always accepting the status quo, but participating in class discussions, bringing ideas to the workplace, and remaining open to continuous learning, which is what we call lifelong learning. All of these, I've got 9 listed here. These are all a combination of the cognitive and affective domain. They're all a combination of thinking skills plus having the right attitude. You need the right attitude as well as thinking skills to be able to do each of these. And the last 3, especially metacognition, questioning, and remaining open to continuous learning, are related to lifelong learning, which many of us agree is a really essential skill. Let me throw out some other habits of mind that are not on Costa and Calic's list, but that I've sort of collected over the years that I keep hearing. Coming to work or class on time and coming prepared to work. Completing work on time. Giving work one's best effort, completing it thoroughly. Perseverance, that was on their list. Striving for accuracy. Participating in discussions. Contributing to a team. Managing impulsivity, that was also on their list. Responding appropriately to feedback. Self-evaluating one's work. Being self-motivated, taking initiative and being proactive. Working independently, setting priorities, planning and organizing, managing time and deadlines. These are all skills that today's employers really, really want in their employees. They're also skills that a lot of faculty want in their students. We want students to come to class on time, be prepared, give work their best effort, participate in discussions. A lot of this applies to the classroom as well as in the workplace. All of these get short shrift and blooms because, again, these are habits of mind that are a combination of cognitive and affective skills. In fact, these are so important that I would lump these all together under a category that I call professionalism. There was a survey, an organization called Heart Research Associates is periodically contracted by AAC&U, that's the American Association of Colleges and Universities, to survey employers on how well they think college graduates are prepared in terms of a number of key learning objectives: communication skills, quantitative skills, problem solving skills, things like that. The survey in 2018, 5 years ago, added 2 new skills to the list that I had never seen on that survey before. They were the last 2 on this list: being self-motivated and working independently. And of the 15 learning outcomes that were on that survey, those 2 tied for number 4 in importance by employers. So these kinds of traits are increasingly important. And again, they're all not clearly addressed by Bloom's. So let me pause there again. Enrique, Amanda, any comments or questions coming in?
Amanda, would you like to go first?
Lots of great comments, Linda. I don't even think I could do them justice to summarize them. Lots of agreement with what you're saying. Difficult in assessing things like professionalism, conversations about grit, but just the back channel is fantastic. So I will definitely capture it and present it to you so you can read it. But you're inciting wonderful conversations among all of these stakeholders for outcomes and assessment.
Okay, anything I can respond to?
Nope, no direct questions. There's some overall questions. There was one, it just, and I think this was more rhetorical. Does higher thinking of Bloom's really help me with my assessments? But I think that was more of a rhetorical kind of getting the juices flowing. Unless I missed something, Enrique.
The benefit of higher order thinking skills is just in when you're identifying learning outcomes, encouraging faculty to think beyond basic knowledge. An example, I once worked with a biology department, and every single learning outcome was that students will know this or understand that. Every like 6 outcomes, and this was a bachelor's degree program. And I'm thinking they can't actually do biology. They can't actually engage. I mean, it was students understand the principles of biological research. They can't do biological research. They can't interpret articles that others have written on their biological research. I mean, it was weird. And I do occasionally run across programs like that. Frankly, I'd like to see in higher ed all learning outcomes be at the higher order thinking skills level, because you can't analyze without some basic understanding. So the basic understanding is implicit. I don't think it needs its own learning outcome. If I've got faculty that are really, it's tough to change. What really raises a red flag is if half or more of the learning outcomes are at the knowledge and understanding level. I want to see at least half at the higher order thinking skills level. I often say to people that, to me, that's part of the big difference between high school and college, because yeah, in high school you learn stuff, but in college you learn to think about it, and students can learn to think about it right as they're learning. Plus, we now have research that if you get them thinking about it, it creates lasting learning. We know from neuroscience research that if you have students memorize facts for an exam, it goes into the shallow memory part of the brain. And if you could spring that final on them just a few weeks later, they would do terribly. They would already forget it. So why are we making them learn it? And then also when they can just look it up on their phone, why are we making them memorize anything they can look up on their phone? So, that's where Bloom's is helpful. If you're working with somebody that's stuck back, teaching what was taught 30 years ago, and getting them to think more about that. But I'm still not really sure you need a taxonomy, and especially Bloom's, because it's just missing so much of what's important in the 21st century. Okay, well then let me,
Linda, if you don't mind, I just would like to again go back for just a second to this professionalism slide here that you have, right? So, I'm just so happy that you actually call it what it is. It's an observable behavior. It's a skill. And so many times we talk about student engagement or student experience without really having good understanding of what those terms mean. And here they are. When you see that the student comes to work on class on time and they are prepared, that's something you can really observe. You can attest to the fact that student is doing it. There's no magic to it. And again, self-evaluation of someone's work, well, there is the work. Why don't you evaluate yourself? Give yourself feedback. Again, you are absolutely right. I'm just so very happy that you mentioned those things, that students can be taught those skills. Controlling yourself, communicating well, those are very specific, tangible things that can happen, can be taught and should be taught in the classroom. So again, I'm just very happy that you're pointing this out. So thank you.
Yeah, I just had earlier this week, before the pandemic, I did a lot of consulting where I would go out and visit colleges and work with faculty face to face. And of course, that all died with the pandemic. This week I had my first visit to a campus. I've been doing stuff by Zoom, but it was just so nice to be in the same room with people and be able to read their body language better and stuff like that. And the concern of this college was they really wanted students to develop a sense of social responsibility, which a sense of social responsibility, that's really more an attitude in the affective domain. The more I think about it, I'm not sure that a lot of goals in the affective domain are accessible. And the reason is I'm not really sure they're teachable. I look on learning outcomes as a promise that we're making to our students and their families and their eventual employers and to society, and to that if you graduate with a degree from our school, you will have achieved these learning outcomes, the institutional learning outcomes, program learning outcomes, and you will have achieved them at a certain level. You can't guarantee that somebody's going to be prepared for a life of service to others or social responsibility, that they're going to have that disposition. They can do the, say the things you want to hear, but how are they going to go out and live their life? We can't make that guarantee. Now you can do that with something like writing or critical thinking, because they can't fake it. If they can't write well, they can't fake it. But if they don't have that sense of social responsibility, they can fake it. And I'm not sure it's accessible, but I'm also not sure it's teachable, and therefore should it be a goal. But you can teach a lot of the underlying skills that if they want a life of service or a life of being socially responsible, they know what to do. And that's sort of what we're getting at with this list here, that we can't guarantee, for example, that every student who graduates will persevere, but we can give them all the skills and they can know how important it is, and then they make their own decisions. So that's another thing I'm not crazy about with Bloom's is I'm not sure the affective domain really represents educational objectives. I can be proven wrong, but usually it ends up focusing on what's teachable. What are the teachable skills? Ethics is another really good example. We can't guarantee that everyone who graduates is going to behave ethically, but they can know what an ethical decision is in the discipline or in a career field. And they know what kind of questions they need to ask when faced with an ethical dilemma. So you can teach them those skills, but we can't promise that they will all be ethical. Okay, let's look at some alternatives.
Linda?
There's a question from Jamie.
Can I hold off because I want to make sure I get through my slides? Okay,
of course.
I will pause again and then we can bring them. Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, you guys may not know how anal I am, but I have this all timed out and I want to make sure I get through my whole deck of slides.
You're the host. Thank you.
We'll have some more time. Okay.
No
problem. A couple of other taxonomies for you to consider. Some of you may have heard of L.D. Fink. He's written books on course curriculum design, not programs, not gen ed. We met each other a number of years ago and did a workshop together where he talked about more curriculum and I talked more about assessment. He came up with these 6 dimensions of learning. He actually feels that they should be addressed in every single course. I don't agree with that, but this is, these are all things for you to think about. Some of his are similar to Bloom's. He has what he calls foundational knowledge that sort of combines the knowledge and understanding parts of Bloom, knowledge and comprehension. Then he has application, but he also points out some creative thinking there. Integration is what I think Bloom calls synthesis. But then he has what he calls the human dimension, which is learning about oneself and others. Part of that would be that metacognition I mentioned to you about learning how to learn by understanding how one learns. Caring would be the affective domain, but he simply calls it developing new feelings, interests, and values. And then there is learning how to learn metacognition. If you want to learn more about this, he's written whole books on this. I think I'd feel a little more comfortable saying pick and choose the ones you think are appropriate for your course, but he would agree again very strongly that he would not want to see a course based entirely on foundational knowledge. He'd like to see faculty incorporate as many of these as they can. Then there's Bob Marzano and Deb Pickering that developed dimensions of learning. Now, I think they were thinking about K-12 education, not higher education, but I really like their dimensions of learning. The first one is called attitudes and perceptions, which is things like experiencing a sense of comfort and order or perceiving tasks as valuable and interesting. That gets at the affective domain in Bloom's. Then there's acquiring and integrating knowledge. So that gets into both knowledge, understanding, and application. Then they have a category that they call extend and refined knowledge. I think that gets into what Bloom calls analysis, where you look at all the pieces and see how the pieces fit together. I know that's how I love to learn, is if I can create a framework, if I can create a chart or a diagram that pulls everything together, that really makes it powerful. Then they have a level called use knowledge meaningfully. And I think this incorporates evaluation and synthesis on Bloom's. And then there are those habits of mind. Now, the specifics he has for habits of mind are different than what Costa and Gallic had. He puts critical thinking here. He also puts creative thinking. And then there's that self-regulated thinking, evaluating one's own work. Now, this is an awful lot for you to take in. But if you really study it, I think this does a better job addressing what many of us think is important in higher ed than Bloom's taxonomy. Now, Bob Marzano also developed something, this is his dimensions of learning with Deb Pickering. He also developed with John Kendall a taxonomy of educational objectives. I don't know why he did both. They are different. He does separate knowledge from levels of processing that knowledge. I like the dimensions of learning better, but you can kind of borrow and steal, bits and pieces from all of this. One of my takeaways when I look at Bloom and Fink and Bob Marzano and his colleagues is they take the same set of skills. They all talk about critical thinking. They all talk about problem solving. They all talk about some kind of application. They talk about using information, and all they do is organize them differently. And I think the fact that there are so many different taxonomies suggests that there's no one best taxonomy out there. But one of these might do a better job prompting conversation than Bloom's. Okay, let me pause again for any questions or comments that came in.
We had one that a lot of people echoed and were curious about being addressed is back to the professionalism one. And the question was that if, let me go back, sorry, I didn't scroll back, but professionalism seems to basically, by assessing it and not teaching it, you're really favoring those that have the privilege of being taught those or being scaffolded those earlier. And I apologize, whoever put it in the chat made it very more eloquent than that, but that's the basic understanding.
No, you have to teach it. Now, some of the things, an issue that a lot of faculty struggle with, and one of the reasons that assessment projects are often disconnected from grading, is when you grade students, you grade them not only on how well they've achieved a course learning outcome, but also, did they come to class? Did they turn their work in on time? Did they follow directions? If you make professionalism one of the learning outcomes in your course, then you can grade on those things separately. If you're asking students to do a research paper, those things shouldn't count towards grade for the research paper, but it can count separately towards 10% of the final grade as professionalism and participating in class discussions, and all the things we talked about there count. Hold that thought, because I'm going to come to another slide talking about that. Anything else has come in?
I think just follow up on that. So I'll ask it, and then if you're going to address it, then please say so. But the follow up is assessing professionalism seems like it would be problematic in terms of assumed cultural behaviors, even if it's something that's taught.
Yes, and a real good example is participating in discussions, because in some non-American cultures, people are taught to be very deferential to authority. And if they speak up in class, you know, to them, it feels like they're challenging authority, and they're extremely uncomfortable doing that. Then you have people that have disabilities, you know, a hearing loss or a speech impediment, which may make it difficult for them. Or it may be, you know, because of their past experience with things like the color of their skin, they, you know, that may make them reluctant to participate. I wouldn't adopt as a course learning outcome professionalism with all the things that were on that list. I think some faculty in some classes will find some of them more teachable and accessible than others. Just focus on what's appropriate for your class. Certainly following directions and getting work turned in on time. Those are things I don't see cultural differences there, but I'm not familiar with every culture, so I could be challenged on that. But it also means bringing everybody up to speed, you know, not just saying the first day of class, you're going to lose points if you turn it in late, but a really good tool for a big project is something called scaffolding, which is taking a big project and instead of just saying, assigning it the first day of class and collecting it the last day of class, having little pieces of the project due at various points. That, you know, that's one way students learn to be conscientious. When I've taught, especially first year students, I have something due with every class. It may be a one-sentence summary of what they read, but it gets them in the habit where they have to do homework for every class, and it forces them to bump up the importance of my class with their work responsibilities, family responsibilities, things like that. Let's jump ahead to my suggestions, and then we can come back and talk about that some more. I gave you several taxonomies, and of course, my favorite one is mine. I just find this really useful, and these bubbles are sized roughly into what I think is often their importance in higher education. The biggest bubble is transferable skills, which are the kind of skills that you need whatever job or career you end up in. Communication skills, problem solving skills, basic quantitative skills, being able to work with people of diverse cultures. These are skills that should be taught in gen ed as well as in the major. The kind of yellowish bubble in the bottom left corner are career specific skills. Like if you're in an accounting program, you learn accounting skills. If you're in a horticulture program, you learn horticulture skills. Knowledge and understanding, yeah, there's a certain amount of head knowledge that people need in many careers. You don't want to have to stop to look up everything on your phone. So that's the orange bubble. The blue one is the habits of mind that we've talked about. And I have attitudes and values down there in a small bubble because I know that for some colleges and some programs, attitudes and values need attention. For example, a lot of faith-based colleges want students to graduate with certain values, and I respect that.
Oh, Linda, we lost your
Linda.
sound momentarily.
Yeah, we lost you. Linda, we lost your sound. Can you hear?
Oh,
Oh.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Oh, now it looks like you might be frozen.
Yeah. Are you seeing the slides advance? Are you hearing me now?
Yes, we can hear you. The slides are advancing. Your video seems to be lagging a little bit, but we can hear you and see the slides.
Okay, I just got a pop-up that my internet connection is unstable, and I do enough of these that I know it's not in my house. It's somewhere between where I am and where you guys are. But let me know again if I freeze, and I'll try to repeat things. I said before, I'm not really crazy about attitudes and values as an outcome, but I know that there are, for example, faith-based schools that want their students to graduate with certain values. And even though it may not be explicitly teachable, it's something they hope to instill. And a lot of their programming is towards that end. And I respect that. So I have that down. But I don't expect everybody to have goals related to attitudes and values. Second suggestion is, as I think the main value of taxonomies is to help faculty see beyond knowledge and conceptual understanding when you're articulating learning outcomes. I don't think it's helpful with assessment per se. It helps you realize that you're not, teaching the right outcomes and that you need to rethink your outcomes. I think they're also helpful in inspiring faculty to consider new kinds of learning outcomes. The list I have here appeared on some of the taxonomies that I shared with you earlier. These are all really cool goals that we usually don't include as learning outcomes, but I think we could, organizing yourself. And that's a teachable and accessible goal. Listening with understanding and empathy. I'm not sure where that would be taught, but that's something that we certainly need a lot more of in this world that we should be focusing on. Questioning and posing problems. We focus a lot on problem solving, but not on identifying problems. Generating new ways of viewing situations. That's a wonderful goal. Analyzing one's own errors and constructing models. So it can get you thinking of things where, yeah, that's really important. And I think that's really important. And maybe I should embed that in my course. Next big suggestion is to focus on skills and habits of mind that are particularly important to employers. Even if you're teaching gen ed, you're teaching those transferable skills that employers want. These 10 goals that I have listed here, and they're nouns, they're not stated as learning outcomes. There have been a lot of surveys over the last 5 or 10 years on what employers are most looking for, not just that one survey that I mentioned earlier. These are the ones that really pop up most often. Teamwork and collaboration, which frankly, we put students into groups, but very rarely in college do they get to really learn, what does it mean to be an effective team member? What does it mean to collaborate effectively? Articulating ideas clearly and effectively. I think we've got that covered with focus on writing, speaking, and increasingly visual. Real world problem solving is what they want rather than what we call critical thinking. Evaluating information and conclusions. I think we focus on that a lot. Professionalism, I've talked about. Working with people from diverse cultural backgrounds. When we have DEI goals, this is what they want. Nothing highfalutin. They just want their employees to be able to work with people from diverse backgrounds. Flexibility and adaptability to change, which are things, and creativity and innovation. Those are things that, frankly, I don't think most of us in higher ed do a great job with. We give students a good grade for following the rules, for following instructions. We don't really focus on that. And then ethical judgment and using numbers, statistics, and technology. I think that's a really good set of 10 outcomes to start with. Now, I'm sure some of you are familiar with the essential learning outcomes from AAC&U. They are under revision right now because they're about 25 years old and they need an update. I'd like to see them include more of these things, and I've communicated that to them. Okay, let's go back to professionalism and making that a more explicit learning outcome in a course or in a program. Here's an example. If you assign students a library research paper, you could, and I always create a rubric with an assignment. Students get the rubric with the assignment so they know how they're going to be graded. for the library research paper, I would grade in 3 ways. They would basically get 3 separate grades for it. One is the writing quality of the paper. The second is information literacy, the use of resources. And the third is professionalism. And with this kind of an assignment, you could include in that how well students follow the directions, because part of being professional is if you're given instructions, read them, make sure you understand them and follow them. Whether the assignment was turned in on time, whether the student went above and beyond the bare minimum. For example, if you said you want to see at least 5 sources, you know, did they include 8 sources? And other things, that only the aspects of professionalism that are relevant to this particular assignment. Now, some of these, it involves teaching the students, like for instance, reading and following the directions. You could, after you hand out the assignment, ask students to write summaries of what are the key things you're looking for, or ask them to submit a checklist where you have a checklist of all the things you want to see in an assignment, and they have to check off whether they've done it. I've done, excuse me, peer reviews where students swap papers and they do that checklist with each other's paper, and that's how they get projects. Okay. That completes things. We still have about 12 minutes left. I always, after talking for about 45 minutes, my voice starts to go. Any more questions, comments, ideas that have come in?
There was one that garnered a lot of reactions. Bree, I'm going to pronounce your last name wrong, Bree, and I apologize, Lauka. This brings to mind the reality that there's no such thing as value-free teaching and learning. The outcomes we set are infused with values that may or may not be equitable for learners from different backgrounds or identities.
Yeah. That's a subject for another session. One of my passions is being fair to students. And that's, yeah, it's too much to get into right now, because I have another thing I could do on 10 steps to be equitable and be fair. I'm not an expert on DEI, but I have written a lot on being fair. And I guess the one thing I would say now is we need to be aware of that, and be aware of hidden inequities, and that it's possible we all bring our varied perspectives in, and simply, yeah, everything you do say, you know, is this being as fair as possible? Does every student have the best opportunity to show me what they've learned and to learn? And just have that question in the back of your mind as much as possible.
So another one is, I have thought about learning goals and objectives as distinct, that the goal is where we want students to end up, and the objectives is what they want to accomplish to demonstrate accomplishment of the goals. Is this wrong or limited?
I've heard of things like that. I've heard, for example, that goal represents more like an institutional learning outcome or a program learning outcome, and the objectives are more course outcomes, or objectives might be tasks. You know, there's so many different vocabularies out there that's where I just give up, and I'm not trying to say mine is best. The key thing is, if you're comfortable with it and your colleagues are, that's fine, but just recognize in higher ed, we do not have a standard glossary for these things. So that gives you a lot of latitude, that if you're happy with the way you use the terms and your colleagues are, and it's clear to everybody, go for it.
And there was a question from the palette. How are all taxonomies equal or different if the focus is not on higher order of thinking skills?
I'm sorry, how is what?
How are all taxonomies equal or different if the focus is not on higher order of thinking skills?
Well, remember, they're classification systems, and none of them, except me, says that any one is more important than the other. It's just a collection of categories. D felt, that you should address all 6 of his categories, but he didn't say how much time you should spend on each of the 6. So that's a decision depending on what you're teaching and what your students are and what they most need. I'm the only one saying that I think in higher ed, we really need to be focusing on thinking and performance skills, and not just knowledge and content knowledge and conceptual understanding. But even there, I wouldn't tell you something's more important than others. What I did share with you is what employers are looking for. And yeah, if I could take that long list of what employers are looking for and condense it down, I would say 2 big things. One is communication skills, and the other is problem solving skills, which we address under information literacy. An awful lot of those skills are sort of subsets, and you could put them under those 2 big categories. When I work with a program or an institution on what should be your big program goals or big institutional learning outcomes, I always start with communication and some euphemism for problem solving skills. It may be critical thinking, it may be information literacy, but start with those 2 big categories, and that'll cover a huge amount of what you want your students to learn. Then add some additional goals, but those are the 2 that I have yet to find a program where those aren't important outcomes.
And I think you're right, because I think most of our, in California, most of our colleges, like for example, Fresno City College, we do have our institutional learning outcome has a communication, number 1, 2, critical thinking. So yeah,
yeah, exactly. And I know a lot of you are in community colleges, and even if you're not, I know a lot of you serve underprepared students, and a lot of them, when they come to college, they have really not been taught critical thinking skills. I think that's the most important thing that we can focus on. Years ago, I worked with a community college on the East Coast where the faculty had decided that every gen ed course had to include critical thinking as an outcome, because their students were so underprepared, and it was so important that for a course to be deemed as to count as gen ed credit, it had to incorporate critical thinking. It was a pretty broad definition of critical thinking. You're going to have to do that if you're going to have a math course and a literature course and a science course all count as critical thinking. But I thought that was great. I wish every college would do that. Anything else? We've got about 5 more minutes. I put up my website here. I am slowly retiring, and I had a blog on my website for a number of years, and at the beginning of the pandemic, I just ended it. But I think there are still some entries there that you all might find helpful, and there are a lot of what I shared with you today is taken from blog entries that I put there. If you want to read more, there are several on learning outcomes, including my dislike of blooms.
Linda, I have a question. So what I have learned today as a faculty in a community college, what can I do on Monday to start off thinking about what has been said today?
At this point, we're closing in on halfway through this semester, if you are on a semester system. And I really hate to suggest to faculty that they change things halfway through the semester. I know how busy you all are, but I think you can think about the next time you plan your next courses, be they for the summer or the fall. What would you like to do differently? Maybe just choose one course you teach and try adding professionalism as a learning outcome, and think about how would you help not just tell students to turn things in on time, but what does professionalism look like in your discipline, in your career field, in your course? Can you give students any learning activities to help them develop those professionalism skills? And can you assess students on them? Even if it's 3% of the final grade, just play around with it a little bit. I'm going to get out of these slides.
So Linda, thank you again for your time and sharing of the expertise. We are scheduled for 2 hours, as we always are. So
Okay, I'm sorry. I had the impression it was
grateful.
45 minutes to an hour.
Yeah, not a problem. There's no time constraints on our end yet. We are here to continue the discussion, and as Amanda pointed out, there's just tons of questions in the chat. We have really quite a vigorous discussion going on, so I certainly don't want to cut anybody off at this point. We'll continue talking for at least another 50 minutes or so. If you want to, you're welcome to stick around and listen. But obviously, again, I'm just so grateful for your support of those Friday talks, and this is not the first time that you visited us. So I'm sure we are, well, at least I'm hoping we are going to hear back from you sometime in the future as well. So thank you so much.
Okay. Well, thank you for having me, Jarek.
Of course,
It was fun to be able to talk about this.
We have your contact information. We know where to find you if we need anything. So thank you very much.
Okay.
Alrighty. And then I have a question here from Amanu Tembo. Please, if you could speak your mind. Can you unmute yourself and just state your question, please?
Yeah, hi. I was
Here we go.
wondering, I think I had a few questions.
Sure.
I wanted to know what the description of critical thinking might have been and how applicable it would be to multiple disciplines. So from like STEM disciplines to, I don't know, literature or English or communications, so to speak. And then the other point I wanted to bring up was, I think I forgot it. I think it was about your last one of your last remarks, and it's not coming to me right now. I'll leave it at that question.
Okay. There are disciplines experts here, and I don't claim to be necessarily I don't mean to be imposing on others, but critical thinking normally is identified or is defined as really a way to analyze, evaluate scientific information, right? And again, by scientific information, I mean different disciplines. So this would be in math, philosophy, science, psychology, and so forth. So that's what it is. I think that in the scope of the discussion about student learning outcomes is that analysis, evaluation, synthesis, those are all observable behaviors. Those are specific skills that can be taught. And again, Linda indicated that before. So it's not something that we just have an idea about, or it could be inferred. No. These are specific skills that really need to be forwarded in classrooms. And again, when we go back to the discussions that have been taking place in the chat, asking about the context of those those skills acquisition, well, those again need to be relevant to our students. We are dealing with adults, and we know the theory of andragogy. We as adults, I mean, not the children like it, but we don't like to waste time on things that are of no interest to us. So if there is a skill or a competency that needs to be taught and acquired by the student, best thing to do is put it in the context that's relevant to students' lives, their jobs, their expectations, and so forth. So I just hope I addressed at least part of the question. So to be continued. If you have any more questions, please don't hesitate to let us know. Yes, Linda.
I can stay for about another half hour, and then I have to leave for another appointment. I have here my book, and here's what I've said about critical thinking. Critical thinking is a widely used term whose meaning lacks popular consensus. In other words, I mean, one of my favorite things is you ask any two people what critical thinking is, you're going to get two different answers. I don't like the term. I go on to say it's often used as an umbrella term for many kinds of thinking skills that go beyond basic understanding. So I think a lot of people use it synonymously with those higher order thinking skills.
That's right.
And it could be any of those. And honestly, instead of critical thinking, I wish we would just say thinking skills. That, you know, every course should address thinking skills beyond basic knowledge and understanding. And I think that's what we're getting at. And then I do feel more comfortable letting each discipline define, or cluster of disciplines, like the natural sciences could come up with a mutual definition of critical thinking that's most appropriate to them. Same with the social sciences, same with the arts, same with the humanities. I don't think every individual science discipline needs its own separate definition of critical thinking just to keep things useful. But I don't get me going on critical thinking.
Absolutely right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Linda. Amanu, thank you very much for the insightful question. Thank you.
I have another one on the Padlet, Jarek, if you want me to
Please.
ask that. How can
Go
we
right ahead.
leverage real world job descriptions to help us engineer student learning outcomes?
Why not just do it? I guess I don't understand. I mean, how can we leverage it? You know, accreditors want colleges to engage in evidence-informed decision-making, and there should be an expectation that we bring that kind of external information to bear when we're considering learning outcomes, and not just career programs, but liberal arts programs. What do students end up doing, and how can the liberal arts courses be designed to help students once they get out into the real world? They can. I'm a huge advocate of the liberal arts, but looking at job descriptions, or simply the surveys of employers like I shared with you for the kinds of skills that they're looking for. But there needs to be the expectation at your institution that you bring that kind of external evidence. So I just saw a chat comment post off that the problem is that job descriptions are immediately dated. Yeah, you know, I would be happy with the surveys of employers, and that also is going to change. But the thing with those surveys is they focus on more generic skills that are lasting, like communication skills, problem solving skills, rather than real specific technical skills.
So Linda, quick question from piggyback on what you just said. We focus on student learning outcomes rather than skills and competencies. What do you think is critical for employers to be focusing on? And also as faculty in different disciplines, especially in the CTE field, how can I carry those skills to an employer?
I don't know if your CTE programs have what might be called a business advisory board. You know, a group of your career center should have some evidence on who are the big employers in your area. And you can also find, I'm learning that a great source to find out what your students are doing is LinkedIn. You can just do a search on LinkedIn for everybody who lists your college as a graduate, and even search by major, and you can pick up a lot of useful information. And you can also contact them, not with a big complicated survey, but just say, how's life? If you could do your education over again, what would you do differently? You know, just get useful information that way. But some kind of a business advisory board that you can contact a couple of times a year saying, you know, what are you looking for? What's your biggest frustration with applicants? You know, what do you wish applicants brought to the table that you're not seeing? what are the top skills? And somebody's posting that most programs have that. I think that, you know, you're not going to get perfect data. As somebody said, it's a rapidly shifting field. I'm big on qualitative as well as quantitative data.
And also, how do you feel with about rubrics, using rubrics?
I love rubrics with a passion.
Hmm.
I think they've been the biggest positive impact of this whole assessment movement. 30 years ago, nobody was using rubrics. And now, if I do a visit or I ask for a show of hands here on how many are using rubrics, and anything less than half or 2/3 raise their hand, I'm really shocked. I've told you fairness is really important to me. Rubrics have made me a fairer grader, because I'm not letting myself be blinded to the fact that this paper has a lot of spelling errors, but it still has good ideas. It now forces me to see the good ideas despite the spelling errors. I no longer get arguments from my students about why did I get a C+ and she got a B-. It's all spelled out right there. The students who want to get an A or a B, I give out the rubric with the assignment, and they know what they need to do to get an A or a B. And if they have the motivation, they will try to reach that. And even if they don't get an A, they'll probably get at least a B. So they're learning more. Then when they do better, we know an A paper is a lot easier and faster to grade than a C paper. So I spend less time grading, which I really help. I really hate grading papers. I don't have to write as many comments on the papers as I used to, because a lot of it's taken care of with what I have in the rubric boxes. I just think they're the greatest inventions in sliced bread. And one of the great things is faculty that are now being hired have grown up with rubrics. You know, they've seen them since elementary school. So we're no longer at the point where, you know, what's a rubric? Younger faculty are already very familiar with them, so it's an easy sell.
Thank you. Well, Yoni, do you have a question? Please unmute yourself.
Hi, I'm Yvonne, and I work at Great Basin College in Elko, Nevada. So hello from
Hi.
snowy northern Nevada. So I'm the one who wrote the question about the job descriptions, and I understand the response about how job descriptions change. The reason I asked that question is because we're actually starting a new program here. So it's called the Mining School of Excellence, and I will be working as part of the team to stand up that program. So we're actually developing a program along with the mines, and it's really, it's exciting and it's challenging. But it's also like, okay, well, like I'm just trying to kind of, as the instructional designer here, I am just kind of to conceptualize and jigsaw puzzle together, what's going to make the most sense to build the bones, the structure of this program, because it's really aimed at building a pipeline, right? Which means that it's aimed at building not just knowledge and conceptual skills and conceptual I guess skills, but it's also about really hands-on skills, right? Because the program is we're designing the program to start with high school students and get them introduced to the different fields that are in mining, but they're also fields that can translate to, they're disciplines that can translate to other fields. So engineers, you don't have to just be a mining engineer. If you're interested in mining, you could go to, from our college, you could transfer into another college and get a degree in any kind of engineering that you're interested in. It doesn't have to be mining engineering. Same with geology. You don't have to get into geotech for mining, but we want to introduce you to that. But then along with that, with the outcomes, it's all about, building those outcomes in a very practical way so that it's skills-based, but it's also getting them ready for employment, because they might decide, right after high school, hey, I'm ready to go and work in the mines right now.
Mhm.
So we need to build into our program, into the framework of that program, those skills that are going to be needed, but I don't want just general skills. So that's why I was asking about, you know, how do we, in a practical way, actually leverage job descriptions, because there are real jobs out there that these people are going to possibly be stepping into.
Yeah, I think it's just, you have to recognize it's going to be a continual process, especially any career that involves technical skills, where, you know, technical skills are changing on a monthly basis. And you just have to accept the fact that there are some courses, the really technical ones, that are going to have to be updated almost every semester to represent the latest technology. But especially for those students that do want to transfer into more advanced study, things like writing skills and teamwork skills, you know, those are not going to change that much.
And I have a question here, a wonderful question. I think we can all agree on this. It says, Linda, what would you say to faculty who see outcomes assessments as a separate from grading? Because we tend to use grades as an assessment.
Yeah, when the assessment movement started, there was a lot of fear that if assessment results were bad, if students didn't do well on the assessment, the results would be used punitively against individual faculty members, that they might be denied promotion or tenure, or might even lose their jobs. I really think it ended up being unfounded. I've never heard a documented incident of that happening, but that was why initially all the assessment experts, alleged experts, none of us knew what we were doing in those days, said assessment should be kept separate from the grading process. There were also a lot of faculty that were, again, nervous about this and said, well, it's a violation of my academic freedom. You know, you can't interfere with anything happening in the classroom. Another reason why people said, well, we'll keep collecting assessment evidence separate from grading. I think what's happened at many colleges around the country is everyone has realized that that created a huge amount of extra work. You know, if you have a final paper or project in your class, and of course you grade it, why not also use it as assessment evidence at the same time, rather than creating a separate project? But let me take it a step further. I have this fantasy that you have a course that's taught by 8 or 10 different faculty. They all get together and they all agree that there will be a project at the end. And they furthermore all agree that they'll all use the same rubric to grade it, and the rubric will flow from the program learning outcomes for the course. Well, then after they grade it, they can just combine all their rubric scores, and then your assessment's done. You really have merged grading and assessment. That's my fantasy. It's the least amount of work. What you could do is, if you have one professor in the group that says, well, I also think that we should grade on, I want to grade on X in my projects, and nobody else agrees, well, fine, then that person can add that extra trait to their rubric and just deal with it themselves. But there should be at least a core, what I like to think of as the top half of the rubric, that everybody that teaching the course should agree we're all going to be grading students on it, and we'll turn in our aggregated data, and that's what we use for assessment. They really, you know, we should be grading students on how well they achieve the main course and program outcomes. Or why do we have program outcomes if we're grading them on different things? So, and I think over time we're going to get to that point. Again, younger faculty who have come in, they're used to having rubrics and having outcomes. They're used to this kind of stuff. I think we'll evolve to that point.
Jane, you're saying, so you're advocating for signature assignments?
For a final?
Signature assignments, yes.
one of the things that we know is a signature project or capstone project is a really good learning opportunity for the student, because that's where they synthesize everything they've learned, or a lot of things they've learned throughout the course. There's research that demonstrates the value of that. So as a pedagogical tool, I really like it. And then as long as you're doing it, it's a great assessment opportunity. You can assess 3, 4, 5 learning outcomes all with this one project. At least getting some basic data. And if the students do great, I mean, let's say their writing skills are great, your job is done. You know, there's other writing assessments throughout the course, but if they're doing fine by the end of the course, great, that's done. If they're not citing literature correctly, then you can look at what else is going on in the course and, you know, maybe do some other assessments. But I like to keep this as simple as possible. And I also like to start out as an optimist that when we do this assessment, students are going to do great. And we could just say, great, our work is done, and move on. But only drill down where there's a problem area.
Thank you. Jarek or Amanda, anything?
I'm just having so much fun learning from all the experts in the chat, as well as you, Linda, and everybody being challenged.
I have not been able to go through the chat, so I'm missing all of that.
One of the amazing things in the chat is we're talking about is this is such an opportunity to challenge how we think and really think critically about our own thoughts on assessments. And we don't necessarily all have to agree, just like you're saying, objectives or outcomes, you know, that vocabulary doesn't matter, but we're thinking about our assessment practices. And to what you articulated earlier, it's not something we've done in the past. And so to be here now, to be able to think, okay, it's not just about how we teach, but how are we really getting to the assessments that show, are we teaching well? Are we supporting our students' learning? And all of that is a great place to be in education. We have far to go, but it is amazing to think how far we've come.
It is. I often say that even though these are incredibly, horribly challenging times for higher ed, we have been in sort of a golden age for the last 25 or 30 years, because there has been an awful lot of good research on what helps college students learn and succeed. And we're, you know, that research is being shared in effective ways, and a lot of us are using and applying that research. So in a lot of ways, students are getting a better education now than they got a generation ago, because of all that research that we're able to work with.
And this isn't in the chat. This is maybe just more of my personal question, but what are your thoughts on the ungrading and contract grading movements? If you don't want to say, that's absolutely okay. I know it's a hot topic, but if you would like to weigh in.
I have a little personal experience with this, because my very first job in higher ed in the 70s was at what's now called Richard Stockton University in South Jersey. Back then it was Stockton State College. It was created in the 60s, which was free thinking, you know, hippie, let's be really radical. And one of the ideas initially, this was before I joined the college, was let's do away with grades. Nobody likes grades. We'll just do everything pass fail. And what they found was that students were doing the minimum needed to pass, but they weren't doing any better than that. So they made it optional, and they introduced another system. It was HSN, high satisfactory, no credit. That kind of helped. You had students who were working hard enough to get the H, but then the next problem they ran into was the students couldn't get into grad school because they didn't have a GPA. So then they introduced traditional letter grading A through F. And I think when they first introduced it, about 30% of students opted for the A through F grading. By the time I got there in the 70s, I think 70% were choosing the A through F grading, because it wasn't just getting into grad school. For some careers, you also, like teaching, you need to have a GPA. So I know from firsthand experience, it doesn't work. You know, you need a GPA to get into school. You need a GPA for some jobs. You need a GPA to get that incentive to do your best work. So I think everybody's having fun talking about it, but now I can see, like in some gen ed courses, you know, if you're a science major and you want to take history of art as your gen ed course, maybe it would be nice not to have the pressure of getting a grade, but that's been an option at a lot of colleges for generations, that you can take a few courses pass fail. So I'm kind of been there, done that.
Great, thank you. I appreciate your weigh in. A quick question that Cheryl had in the chat is, what are some best methods to help faculty develop rubrics? This can be seen as daunting to start that, and Jarek's put in some resources in the chat, but if you had any that you'd also like to contribute, that'd be helpful.
My book, it has a whole chapter on creating rubrics. I did a number of years ago, I did a lit review on creating rubrics, which I'm embarrassed to say I had never done, and I had been doing countless workshops on how to do rubrics, and I learned so much that then I started doing a bunch of presentations at conferences saying everything I thought I knew about rubrics was wrong. I, first of all, don't try to create rubrics for everything. Earlier this week, I told a group, pick one course for the fall semester, pick one assignment in that course, and try to create a rubric for that one assignment. And recognize you're not going to get it right the first time. I often tell the story that over 2 semesters, I taught first year writing. And in those 2 semesters, I went through 7 versions of my rubric to grade student papers. And I was only arguing with myself. The big thing that I learned about rubrics is that you need to use only concrete behavioral action verbs, just like you do in goals. You don't want to have descriptions in the boxes that say things like excellent use of vocabulary, because excellent is a really subjective term. Different people are going to disagree. And you remember, the rubric should be a guide to students on what you're looking for. Well, what's excellent use of vocabulary? So you want to get rid of all those value-laden words in the rubric. And that can be really, really hard. The other thing that I learned that was a huge light bulb is when I had written rubrics, I would start out filling in the A column. That's easy. Everybody's, students are doing exactly what they want. They're doing a beautiful job. That's really easy to write. Then I would write the F column, which is also really easy to write because students are doing nothing of what we want. It's a disaster. And then I would fill in the rest of the boxes just to create a continuum. Completely the wrong way to write rubrics. The most important column that you should start out with is the C- or D column, whatever the column is that represents minimally passing work, because that will determine whether the student passes the assignment, perhaps passes your course, and is ready for whatever comes next, the next course in the sequence or a career or whatever. That is the most important column because it's work that's not great work, but it's adequate work. So you should start filling that column first. That's the hardest one. And then spread it up to the A column and spread it down to the failing column.
And that's actually one of the reasons that I've utilized the 1-point rubric. Or I think Jennifer Gonzalez calls it the 1-point rubric, works exactly that. This is what passing is, this is what proficiency is, whatever it might be, very well articulated. And then the other 2 sides are blank, where if you didn't meet those proficiencies, I can clearly spell out pertinent to your particular submission, or if you exceeded it, how it's there. But yeah, I 100% agree that this is the passing proficiencies you need to demonstrate is incredibly important. Thank you for that.
I just heard about that approach within the last week. It really suggests sort of a 3-column approach where you've got that middle and then you're either better than it or worse than it. I found that usually in higher ed, we need 4 columns. We need that minimal passing one. We need the failing. We need an A, what's truly outstanding work, not just better than the minimum. And then usually there's a big enough gap between A and C that you need that B column in there. I've also found that at community colleges and open admission schools, especially in the first year, a lot of faculty have told me that they want a fifth column between the adequate and the failing that means almost there. Where, yeah, you're still not reaching passing work, but you're pretty close. They feel that their students really need that as an extra incentive so they don't give up. So 4 or 5 columns rather than 3 is what I would advocate.
Linda, thank you for that explanation. You know, we often get confused as faculty is how do you describe a B plus or a C plus, you know, or a C minus? And that's those columns in the middle are very important.
Yeah. I'm also not an advocate of plus minus grading because my background is in educational testing and measurement. And when we measure student learning, we're imperfect. We're only getting a sample, you know, through one assignment or one test of what they've learned. And that imperfection is called measurement error. And I can distinguish between a B and a C, but if you ask me, can I distinguish reliably between B minus and C plus? Absolutely not. So I'm not comfortable giving a B minus versus a C plus. I could not say with confidence that that represents 2 different levels of performance. It's too fine a distinction. I can't do that.
And I'm looking for questions in the chat because I hate to monopolize, but it's for one of the reasons that's why I've gone on my rubrics is no proficiency demonstrated, some proficiency. And again, those points are very well articulated. Some proficiency demonstrated, proficiency demonstrated exceeds proficiency. Because of those plus and minuses, there's no way that's to me completely subjective, but what language I do like to focus on for me is you haven't shown me that you understand this skill that I'm measuring at all. And so here are the reasons why I don't see it. I see some elements of understanding, and here are the reasons. I see understanding, and then I see exceeding understanding. So I go back and forth sometimes depending on the assignment between that and then that 1-point rubric I talked about before. So I agree with you very strongly on that.
And I'm afraid that I do need to leave now. Thanks for letting me stay for the extra half hour. And I'm sorry that I've been so absorbed with this. I haven't been able to also multitask and look at all the comments in chat because I know I would learn a great deal from that. But thank you all for letting me join you all for an hour and a half. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your conversation.
You bet. Thank you so much, Linda. We'll stay in
Thank
touch.
you.
Take care. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Thank you very much. Yes, Amanda, great moderation. Let me see here. So we still have some few minutes. We can still talk. Why not? Bree, you're bringing a number of great questions here, and I tell you, I'm just kind of like trying to respond to them as fast as you can. Do you mind articulating some of your points, please, or maybe one at a time, if you will?
Sure. I guess so. As we talk about professionalism in particular, I come from a background in academic advising, and so working with students a lot in developing some of these personal skills and I guess more life skills in some ways too. But I'm also cognizant of a couple of things. I know we were talking a lot about professionalism being a grading component, but also being an outcome then for courses and potentially for programs. And while I think it's important, I want to think about equity in terms of ability and disability. That's one piece in particular, because I think that for students who require accommodations, especially with timeframes for submission or organizational skills, who need assistance with even with visual and communication ability with disability, that can be, they're limited in how you can assess them on those outcomes in some ways. And then the same thing with the cultural, I guess, framework for some of the professionalism skills. I want to be careful in how we define professionalism, and that if we are basing it on, I know some of the conversation was on job descriptions and work and employer norms and preparing students for employment, which is a lot of what we're doing. We want to make sure that we're not perpetuating and maintaining implicit bias, I think, in some of those professionalism outcomes as they're defined, and helping students to understand what the difference is between demonstrating a skill that you're able to do this versus forcing them to assimilate and to change their value structure and system for operating in different contexts. So I guess those are kind of the main points I'm pushing back on or thinking about. Yeah.
Sure. Great points. Absolutely. So I'm sure others will would like to contribute to the discussion. From my point of view, there is something to be said about the who is the one who defines ability versus disability, for example, right? And if we were to empower our students, then again, it's not our job, at least it shouldn't be, right, to put them in a position where they have to assimilate. If anything, our job is to again teach specific skills that will help our students really analyze the environment in which they operate and question the status quo. I mean, whoever you happen to be as a human being, from any perspective, you should have the right to question authority, to question the status quo, to question what it is that's expected of you. And again, there is completely nothing wrong with that. If anything, again, this is a skill that can and should be taught. And I think ultimately that's what constitutes empowerment, rather than making sure that students comply to our system and they are chugging right along, getting their C's and B's and A minuses in the process. So that would be my take on it. But I tell you, this is just an ongoing discussion. That's just, again, very well articulated thoughts. Thank you. Anyone else would like to add to this?
Oh yeah, Alpha, can I put my 2 cents in first?
Please.
I don't want to be rude. And I 100% agree with what you're saying, Bree. I struggle with the thought of assessing something like professionalism, especially as we're really trying to get away from this very Eurocentric definitions of those very subjective terms, as we globalize our curriculum and think, okay, we're preparing for students for jobs that we can't even imagine. And so by defining professionalism in a very time centered framework, which is a very Eurocentric way of thinking, we're in some contexts restricting them, versus here I'm going to support you in thinking through the context you find yourself in and applying your skills in that context. I don't know how to support that in teaching it, but at the same, well, I do some strategies, but in the same time, I would be very reluctant, as you mentioned, to find the skills as defined in the United States or even in the Central Valley where I come from, because I want to prepare my students for wherever there might be in the entire world. So I just wanted to add that.
All right. Thank you very much. Bree, are you okay with that? Do you have anything else to add? Would you like to comment on any of this? Any other points? I just saw you were typing there relentlessly. I just want to make sure that we hear your voice. That's all.
I had something in my mind and then I forgot it as Amanda was wrapping up. But I do think I agree, and I think that the global contexts for work are really important, like you were saying. And I think also the what you said about jobs not being created yet, right? So this is we're theorizing, we're preparing students for things that are long-term. Oh, here's the last thing I wanted to say. I mentioned this earlier, that some of these higher order thinking and cognition skills are dependent on brain development, and your brain continues to develop until age 25 and even beyond sometimes. So are the outcomes we're expecting students to demonstrate realistic based on their biological development at certain times? And so I guess in thinking about metacognition and those higher order execution skills, that's all. Absolutely. Great point. So thank you again. Alpa, the floor is yours. Go ahead.
Thank you. I think when she was speaking of professionalism, I took it more in terms of teaching students executive functioning, right? Mm-hmm. Being able to monitor their own progress, being able to hand things in so that it'll help their learning. So for example, with my quizzes that I have, homework quizzes, I don't have a due date on them. And you would think, holy crap, they're never going to get them done. Guess what? 90% of them get them done before the exam, because they know that it's going to help them on their summative exam. right? So that takes out that time thing, and they can hand it at any time. But I think that lends towards teaching them executive functioning, right? They're being responsible for their own learning, that they have agency over their own learning. And so that's how I took the professionalism, not so much as dress a certain way, or like you said, code switching, and that kind of, at least that's how I took what she meant by professionalism. Not so much that, more so teaching, working in executive functioning into my curriculum and metacognition. And I'm shocked that it works.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you for that testimony. Very, very well articulated. Thank you. Susan Walcott, you're bringing up and I think very, very, very important point here about the actual skills versus capacity to learn them. Would you please elaborate on this a little bit, if you don't mind? Oh, Susan is here. All right.
Okay. Sorry, it took me a while to get unmuted.
Sure.
Yeah, I became acquainted with King and Kitchener's reflective judgment model way back in the 1990s. So I've been using it forever, literally, in my work. And I found their work to be incredibly meaningful for helping me understand what's going on with my students, and more importantly, what I can do to help my students develop. And so that's my perspective here. But they published a book back in 1994. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend that you take a look. And they include a meta-analysis of research done by a whole bunch of different researchers using their reflective judgment model. And that data shows that the average cognitive development of students in higher education is really small, like a half of a stage of development in an undergraduate degree program. And even students at the master's and PhD level are operating well below what the biological brain capacity would be. So in other words, even though there is such a thing as, the brain still continues to develop till your late 20s, most students are not held back by that. They're held back because they lack skills to even get close to their brain capacity.
I just want to give kudos to Amanda. I think she needs to leave, but thank you, Amanda, for being a co-host.
Thank you for a great session, everybody.
All righty, take care.
Anyway, if you don't mind my adding, I put in the chat along the way that I use King and Kitchener's model to help me design rubrics. And what I mean by that is the levels within the columns within my rubric are based on reflective judgment model. And I found that as a teacher, that really helps me a lot, because it guides, like, what do the students need to do next? In other words, the students aren't going to move, from level 1 to level 4, most of the time. That would be a very unusual circumstance. In general, if they're at level 1, my goal is to get them to level 2, and so I need, and by designing my rubrics using King and Kitchener's model, it tells me exactly what skills I should be working with students on.
Susan, so quick question. How do you tracking the progression of learning from level 1 to level 2, 3, and 4?
Okay, and there's the tricky part. Okay, I've only ever done this within my own courses. I've never gotten, like a whole program to do this. Unfortunately, because the development of these skills tends to be very slow and unstable. I don't know if you all have seen Kurt Fisher's work on schema theory, and he talks a lot about, development followed by regression, and then more development followed by more regression. And it takes a lot of repetition before you get to, students actually are at a new level in a stable way. And in other words, I can try to do this within my courses, but to be truly effective in helping students develop skills, this needs to happen across the curriculum.
That's right. Absolutely. So I think that again, you're bringing up this important point of the fact that students develop, students grow regardless of the discipline, right? Whatever the context is where instruction is taking place, students come with their cultural backgrounds, level of cognitive development, skills that they are already bringing from somewhere else. Again, discipline specific or not, all these things are present that need to be considered. So
yeah.
Ultimately, you're absolutely right. Paying attention to what it is that they can do every step along the way. It's what really shaping the whole discussion. So again, that's very insightful. Thank you very much, Susan.
Yeah, let me just add one quick addition. And this is kind of an anecdote more than anything else. It's based on something I have observed in my classrooms. If I have a series of, let's say, 4 or 5 case assignments in a course, and if most of them are based on the subject matter of the course, but if one of those case assignments is an ethics case, I actually find that student performance drops one whole cognitive level down on the ethics case. And I think it would be incredibly interesting to see more research done on this. But here's my interpretation of that, my hypotheses, if you will. The first is that when students know they're confronted with an ethics case, they want to be seen as good people. You know what I mean? They kind of I want to come across as doing the right thing. And I think that reduces their willingness to explore alternatives more fully. So part of it is this desire to look good, you know, as a good person. And then the second is there is at least some research that suggests that when people move into a new area where they have less experience, their performance does drop down. In other words, people are not at a cognitive level across the board. They have to learn these skills in all the various topic areas and disciplines.
Wow, excellent. Great comments. Really fantastic. I just very quickly, Susan, if would you please elaborate just a little bit about how do you actually measure the cognitive levels?
I actually create rubrics. Let me put my web. I'm an accounting faculty member, or at least I used to be. I'm kind of on the semi-retirement stage these days. I'm going to put my website in here. And I've done in the last 2-3 years, I actually created a faculty guide for the American Institute of CPAs. So there's a tab on my website that says AICPA. And you can freely access that faculty guide, and it includes a rubric that I created for accounting faculty. And what you'll see is that even though it's in an accounting context, the rubric is not at all unique to accounting. And the columns in the rubric correspond to King and Kitchener's cognitive levels.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I see that Jamie is making a point here about grading versus assessment of professionalism, if I'm reading this correctly. Jamie, would you like to elaborate a little bit on your points, please?
Jarek asked if I wanted to say something, so I just dump it in the chat. So basically, I've been thinking about the professionalism, and I don't feel comfortable having it part of the grade in my class. And I want to be wary of criticizing students for walking in late or not speaking up or not doing things that are not part of the learning objectives. However, I am aware of these skills, and maybe I should be willing to share them if the students are open to that, with at the same time realizing that some students might be getting a lot of criticism in that area that they don't really want. So I don't know if that makes sense or not, but yes. I want to focus on what are the learning objectives for my course and not assume that although probably most students do want to get a job, not assume that that's what it's about, assume that they're there to learn. Maybe they want to change the way the world works in terms of how work happens,
Sure.
or will develop that viewpoint at some point in their life. So I want to, I guess I'm considering, well, maybe, you know, I've taken a lot of things out that I thought could be harmful in those ways, and maybe if they want those things in, I could offer that as advice if they would like that advice, but separate it from the grading of the course. I don't know how practical this is. I just thought of it in the last hour and a half or whatever, and probably won't try it this semester. But we'll think about if it's something to bring in or not.
Sure, sure. And let me just assure you that you're not the only one who is struggling with this question. And in the SLO universe, student learning outcomes discussions, I really heard this solution, I suppose, to that problem, that if you have, let's just say this is your English 101 course, and there is certain SLOs that have to do with reading, others that have to do with writing, and then there is yet another SLO that has to do with professionalism. And each one of these could be identified with specific objectives, or again, observable behaviors that students are able to demonstrate to their peers and faculty, and therefore can be assessed. So whether to include those or not, that's obviously your call. When you think of the content of the course, it's really difficult to assess reading but not writing, right? Especially if you keep the students' interest in mind. You would like to tell students, hey, guess what? This is how well you're doing on reading. And this is, you know, and writing is not going to be assessed until later on, or let's just say this semester, I'm just not going to do it. It doesn't quite sound as something that we should be doing. The same thing is with professionalism. Again, as we talked earlier, as we discussed this earlier, I think that professionalism can and should be measured because, again, of this universal presence in pretty much any discipline. And if you want students to, which you rightfully pointed out, question the system, then again, that's the critical thinking skills that come into place. That again could be specifically identified and taught so that students are empowered by observing, analyzing, synthesizing environment within which they operate, and therefore question. Ability to question the status quo is something that again, you're right, I don't think we spend enough time doing. So those would be my comments on this. Anybody else who would like to add to Jamie's comments?
Alpha, would you like to elaborate on your comment? Alpha, if not, Joseph. I think Joseph made a good comment on the chat.
Which comment? I've been commenting a lot.
It's about removing the stressors. Yeah.
Oh yes, I was agreeing with Jamie, and I agree about stressing students out with if they're walking in late, if they're things like that. I think removing stressors definitely helps with learning, right? Extraneous stressors, right? Same thing, speaking to equity, just like Bree was talking about, coming class on time, it is dependent upon having proper transportation or not. I mean, I actually was affected by that back in undergrad. I was at New York City, and the train stopped working, and I couldn't get to class in time to hand in my paper. And the E-train just stopped, and I couldn't get to class. And the professor did not accept my paper, and I got a B because the E-train wasn't working. And that's not equitable, right? So I was aware of these kind of inequities in place. So yeah, I agree with Jamie with, I think when we use professionalism, again, as I spoke before, professionalism, I think I look at it more in terms of executive functioning, not so much as, you dress properly, you get on time. I mean, I get it. Those are qualifications that you require to have when you get a job, but what do you want your students to learn should what you start with? That's all I gotta say.
That's right. Okay, Joseph, let's try it again. I know you've been asking for it. I apologize if this is something with the Zoom feature, but yeah, we can hear you now. Go ahead.
Great. So I was just reflecting on some of the comments that were made earlier about not wanting to necessarily judge students or create additional barriers in the classroom regarding the professionalism concepts. And it occurred to me that we can teach professionalism without evaluating it every single time. So for instance, if we did a role play where a student was asked to demonstrate professionalism, then that's where the grade came from. They would not necessarily need to get penalized for walking into the classroom late. So that was just a thought.
So I just very recently stumbled upon this confession of a student who said that the professor indicated that papers need to be turned in at 6 p.m. Students turned it in at 5:45 p.m. and it was still considered late because apparently it was done in the last minute. I mean, that's where those discussions are leading us into, right? So as Alpa was saying, come on, give me a break. I mean, the train stopped, right? I mean, what do you want me to do? In a sense that, there is always a difference between, the guidelines or the system that faculty develop and try to enforce versus what it is that students learn. Because obviously the content of the paper that Alpa student wrote or has nothing to do with the fact that the train stopped in the tracks, right? I mean, how do these things even remotely link to learning? Anybody's guess, but we try to incorporate or we try to enforce those things all the time. We hear those stories all the time. So this is something that comes up with in this discussion again all the time. So thank you very much, Joseph, for your comments. Anybody else? All right. So what I would like to do is stop the recording at this point. So thank you very much.